Hey everybody, Rob Veno here on Wednesday afternoon for your Wednesday podcast, which features my good friend Teddy Covers from Las Vegas. Today, rather than NBA, we're going to go over the NCAA Final Four, which takes place this Saturday, April the 1st. Haven't talked a lot of college basketball with Teddy this season during the podcast, so we'll reserve today's 30 minutes for breaking down the two games which begin at 6:05 Eastern Time and 3:05 Pacific. Game 8-11, 8-12, South Carolina versus Gonzaga. Gonzaga opened 7 here, up to 138. They are now down to 6.5 in some spots, remain 7 some places. 138 the prevailing total. We see some 138.5s out there. And Oregon at North Carolina, or versus North Carolina in the nightcap. UNC opened 4, 148.5, up to 5. And now we see the total in excess of 152 in some places. So a little movement on the total, Oregon, UNC. Not so much movement at all on the side or total in Gonzaga, South Carolina. Like I said, we're going to break them all down from a betting perspective. To do it, got to bring in my good friend Teddy Covers. Teddy, how are you this afternoon, buddy?
It's a beautiful day in Las Vegas, my friend. I'm doing very well. Yourself?
And we're doing good here too, Teddy. Like I said, we haven't talked a lot about basketball throughout the season, if at all. I think it'd be good for the listeners to get a little bit of NCAA Final Four from us. Everybody else around the nation and around the world is talking about the Final Four, so why not us? The road to get here for Gonzaga and South Carolina, a little bit different. UNC, I guess, Teddy, you could honestly say has had the easier route if you just judge by results and margin of victory. It's been an easier time for the South Carolina Gamecocks, who surprisingly won games by margin throughout this tournament thus far. Gonzaga did have a couple of struggles along the way, and I don't even know if we would call Northwestern a struggle, although in the Northwestern game when things got tight and the goaltending call was not made, some would argue that Northwestern had a real good opportunity at that point to make the huge comeback. This game being played, both of these games being played at University of Phoenix Stadium in Glendale, Arizona. Always a lot of talk about these semifinals, national semifinals, when they're played in large venues about, shooting lines. Will the shooting possibly be off? Will field goal percentages go down? I know there's a lot of people with a lot of different opinions on that stuff. Results would tell you that recently it hasn't made that big of a difference. First game, Gonzaga versus South Carolina here for Saturday. We see the Gamecocks once again as a underdog in a contest. Go ahead and give me initial thoughts on this game, these two teams' paths to get here, and then you and I will get into breaking the game down from an X's and O's perspective.
Sure. Well, the first thing I want to do is clarify a little bit about the point spread for this, because you said it opened 7, and Five Dimes opened 6, Chris opened 7, Westgate opened 7, Penny opened 6.5. And it's funny, a lot of the books that opened 7, the first bets came and pushed it down to 6.5, and a lot of the books that opened 6.5, we've seen some bets come in and push it up to 7. So there really hasn't been a whole lot of movement on this game. But in terms of where the opener was, it's not a broad market move from 7 down to 6.5. It's been a little bit scattershot in that regards. When it comes to South Carolina Gonzaga, if you just look at the results of the NCAA tournament, I don't think any team's played better than South Carolina. Certainly not from a point spread perspective. No team's played better than South Carolina. They've dominated some really good teams. And then, when you look at the back-to-back upsets over Duke and then Baylor and then Florida, the strong end game against the Blue Devils and the Gators, the help that Sindarius Thornwell has finally gotten on the offensive end of the court, which wasn't there all season, and of course the defense, which has been there all season. South Carolina certainly elite in that regard, but when you're winning straight up as a dog and winning, at least against Baylor by big margins, you're obviously doing something right. ATS, and we're talking about a team that's won all 4 previous tournament games by double-digit margins against the spread. They're not just beating the spread, they're eviscerating the point spread right now. And the market's obviously looking at the full season numbers for South Carolina have not caught up with their current level of play. That being said, I mean, in many ways, the Gamecocks are the weakest. I don't think many ways. The Gamecocks are the weakest team still standing, period, in terms of their vulnerabilities. And Gonzaga may turn out to be the best. And the Zags haven't played well in the Big Dance, really, until they had a good half against Northwestern in the first half. And the second half of that game was, the more I think about it, the Wildcats just played out of their minds. I mean, they hit a bunch of tough shots, but the Zags did not respond well to pressure. Similar story against West Virginia. West Virginia gave them, if West Virginia was hitting shots, Gonzaga's home already. They did not respond well to pressure. But they also played a good second half against Xavier, where they just blew them out of the water, and that's the A game for Gonzaga. That's what they're capable of doing. So their first point spread cover of the tournament came obviously at the right time. They sent them to the Final Four for a program that hadn't been there before, but it may be an indicator that the Zags, especially with Michael Williams-Goss, who really struggled the first couple of games of this tournament, has not been at his best throughout. Maybe he's turned the corner and playing like he was when he was a Conference Player of the Year.
Yeah, it's certainly, the size issue, Teddy, if we get down into the players that are going to be on the floor for this game, the size issue always under consideration when Gonzaga takes the floor, because we know Karnowski is just an absolute house in the middle. But throughout this tournament, Zach Collins, the backup center, has made a real name for himself, the more fluid of the two 7-footers, more offensively capable as far as converting shots when you drift away from the rim a little bit further. Karnowski really needs to be close by, where Collins has shown us that he can step away and hit shots. They have two 7-footers that South Carolina has to contend with here, and there's not a lot of size on the South Carolina team, which features a 4-guard lineup. To me, South Carolina is a fantastic defensive team, but in watching Gonzaga throughout the season, a very good defensive team as well. And part of that is because when teams have to set up in the half court, it's hard to penetrate against Karnowski, against Collins. Thoughts on if the size will be a difference maker in this game between Gonzaga and South Carolina?
Well, we talk about the Gamecocks playing a small lineup, and yet in all of these games against bigger teams, that's not like Duke's short on size. Gamecocks won the rebounding battle in that game. Not like Baylor's short on size, and both those teams with big men that will be playing in the NBA next year. South Carolina won the rebounding battle in that game. Florida, not a team that's shy on size in the low post, and the Gamecocks won the rebounding battle in that contest as well. So they have fared extremely well given their size limitations against bigger squads. But again, Gonzaga in some ways is a different animal. For as good as the season that Baylor and Florida had, the Zags have one loss this year. They've been elite. They've beaten Arizona. They went in non-conference play and took care of business. And when it comes to games of this magnitude, no, the Zags haven't played in the Final Four before, but they played in a lot of big games over the years, battle-tested in a way that I think South Carolina isn't. But, and the other thing that you have to say, Gonzaga defensively, all right? I mean, the whole talk of the tournament, oh, my God, look at the South Carolina defense. Aren't they incredible? South Carolina shuts everyone down. You know what? Over the last 5 games, Gonzaga's defense is about 6 percentage points better, and field goals allowed, than South Carolina's. They're playing unbelievable defense. 3 of their 4 tourney opponents haven't gotten to the 60 mark. So I wouldn't sell the Zags defense short. Yeah, pun intended. I think South Carolina could have some problems there, but it may not be the problems that we think in terms of losing the battle of the boards. Yeah,
and just to give the folks the numbers on that field goal percentage allowed for both of these teams. And granted, South Carolina's had a tougher slate of 4 games. They played 4 tougher teams, or at least higher power-rated teams coming into this 5th contest for each team. But throughout the tournament so far, South Carolina's allowed 39.9% field goals, just about 40% to their opponents from the field, where Gonzaga has only allowed 33.7, to your point of Gonzaga being 6 points lower. Certainly a big difference, and something that hasn't gone unnoticed on the Gonzaga side all season long, their defensive prowess. Here, maybe it takes hold. Just if you look at the last game and see that they were able to hold Xavier's star, Trayvon Blewett, who had absolutely gone crazy against his prior opponents inside the tourney, and even at the end of the season, Blewett was playing very, very well offensively. He's the main weapon for the Xavier Musketeers, 3 of 14 and only 10 points against the Zags. Here, Gonzaga take an approach to stop Thornwell and let the rest try and beat him? And if so, Teddy, are they capable? I happen to think they are. Those guards defensively are really good. But Thornwell's a big body and a determined guy. Can they tune Thornwell down the way that they tuned down Trayvon Blewett for Xavier?
That's the million-dollar question, and that's the million-dollar point spread question in this ballgame, in my mind. Though, I mean, Thornwell's had 20+ in every tournament game so far, and when you looked at the SEC as a whole this year, when you talk about impact players, guys who could have the ball in the end of their hand at the end of the game and make a difference, Thornwell's one of those guys. And a lot of teams, for Florida, for example, didn't have that go-to guy down the stretch, the guy they could count on to get to the line or make a bucket when they needed it. And Thornwell served South Carolina extremely well in that regard all year. So even though, Blewett had a heck of a run, maybe he ran out of steam, and maybe we're going to see Thornwell run out of steam here either. But he's not a guy who I'm comfortable saying, yeah, I'm confident they're going to shut him down. He's an NBA talent, and he's played like one.
And his third and last factor to this game, TC, obviously a lot of talk about the South Carolina pressure defense. And Gonzaga has seen West Virginia in this tourney, although they were a hair bit careless with the ball, uncharacteristic of the Zags. They committed 16 turnovers against West Virginia, but they survived that game as a -3 favorite. They wind up with a push, 61-58. That game, in my estimation, probably helps them here against South Carolina, although I will say that maybe the South Carolina pressure, and in fact, I won't even say maybe, the South Carolina pressure is different than the West Virginia pressure. The West Virginia pressure is simply relentless, 94-foot for 40 minutes a game. I don't know that South Carolina is that committed to playing 94 feet of press defense for 44 minutes. I tend to think that Gonzaga getting through West Virginia helps them here, and perhaps their guards, Perkins and Goss and guys, probably find their way through this. I know it's caused South Carolina's defense has caused trouble for opponents thus far. You think Gonzaga gets caught up the way they did against West Virginia, or do they learn a little from that game and wind up being a little crisper with their ball handling in this contest?
Well, I mean, the thing that baffled me the most about the West Virginia game was that they stopped feeding their big man, Karnowski went 6 of 8 from the floor in that game. He finished with, 5 rebounds, and only 2 fouls. He was not a factor for the Zags. And that was because the coast-to-coast pressure from West Virginia really got them out of the flow offensively. And if it were not for Collins in that game, in some ways, they might have been in big trouble. And now, of course, the fact that West Virginia shot 26% from the floor certainly helped. And the fact that it was a foul fest probably saved them as well. Otherwise, that game might have been, final score in the 30s. It could have been. It was ugly. But, as a team survives and advances past an opponent like that, you get a measure of confidence. And, hey, we did that. That team gave us everything we could handle defensively, and we were able to muddle our way through it. And this Zags team is different from a lot of Fuse teams because a lot of Fuse teams haven't been good defensively. And this is, he said, this is the best defensive team that we've had in 18 years. So, previous Gonzaga teams would have melted down against West Virginia when their offense wasn't working. They went through extended stretches where the offense didn't work in that ballgame. But their defense kept them in it. And the non-straight shooting from the Mountaineers. Gonzaga is not a bad shooting team. They're a really good shooting team. And I don't know that if South Carolina has similar issues that that they'll be able to keep it under control against the Zags. It's a real it's a question mark. Obviously, that's why we're talking about the games here. And when we talk about these Final Four lines, Rob Veno, they're great to talk about. We're not talking about games that are lined incorrectly in any way, shape, or form, even with current form in play.
Yeah, from a totals perspective, Teddy, just to round this game out here real quick, South Carolina through 4 games, their game totals have averaged 150 points per, while Gonzaga's have averaged 131.3. South Carolina uncharacteristically with 81.5 points per game. It leads me to this last and final key to the game, and we'll take your thoughts on it. When you have two defenses as good as these two, it's always my opinion that you try to play fast. You don't want to play against half-court defenses in the case of these two. So play fast, get a quicker shot. Don't let the defense come down and set up. It's real difficult to score against South Carolina when they're dug in and set up. It's real difficult to score against Gonzaga when they're dug in and set up. Pace of this game, would you expect these two head coaches, and let's preface it by saying this, as far as tempo is concerned, offensive tempo, Gonzaga ranked inside the top 30 in Ken Pom ratings this year. They're one of your quicker teams in the nation. I'd really expect them to try and go quick here, and perhaps that's an edge to the over. Thoughts on how this game will be played? Jitters always have something to do with it, Teddy. There's a feeling out process. Maybe it's impossible for us to handicap because we don't know the kids and how they'll react. But as far as just sheer strategy, if I was head coach in either one of these teams, I'd want to go quick. I don't really want to play set-up offense against either defense, and I think it really stands out to me in Gonzaga's case because they are a team that's used to scoring at a high tempo.
And when you watch South Carolina in this tournament playing faster than they have all year, maybe you accuse Coach Frank Martin of a little malfeasance here. Because you say, why wasn't this team playing this fast all year? Because they have played better at a quicker tempo. And you can see it in the offensive numbers throughout the course of this tournament. You can see it with all the guys who've been helping Thornwell. I was reading some quotes from Tim Frazier saying that, since we picked up the pace, it's made a difference. And yet we're talking about two not just good. We're talking about two elite defensive teams that can easily get bogged in a half-court game. And, would you be surprised if at the second time out the score is 8-6? You can't be, because that's given the feeling out process and the concerns about early game jitters, and given the intensity these two squads have on the defensive side of the basketball court, even with the tempo expected to be maybe a little bit faster than we might think, and even with the potential for late game scramble points, this point spread range is really good for those. I still have concerns about betting this one up and over the total because, again, you're sitting there, it's so easy to picture, hey, there's 10 minutes in the game and we scored 20 points, and now you're fighting an uphill battle the rest of the way. If I see something like that, I might get involved with an overplay in-game, but not pre-game. I wouldn't mind seeing a bog down early and getting an in-game total of 108 or something, and obviously that'd be a big adjustment, but of 118 or something, and or 128, and getting a little bit of a better number, Rob. But obviously, it would take a pretty slow start to do that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of insight there into that opener this Saturday between Gonzaga and South Carolina. Let's move on to Oregon and North Carolina, where, the size issue is even bigger in this game, Teddy, as far as I'm concerned. Jordan Bell for Oregon made a name for himself last time out. 6-7 block shots, really commanded the paint from a defensive perspective, and all of a sudden a very big bandwagon for Jordan Bell has been established across the country. However, playing North Carolina, which has size upon size upon size, is a little different animal than playing Kansas, a team that, if they had a weakness, it was interior size. They just didn't have it outside of Landon Lucas. There were no bigs for Kansas, and therefore Bell went crazy. This Oregon team, a veteran squad that was to the Elite Eight last year before they ran into Buddy Hield in Oklahoma. So you've got, as much as we've heard about the determination of North Carolina to get redemption for that last-second loss against Villanova on the Chris Jenkins 3 last year, boy, Oregon wants the same type of deal here, the same redemption. They got, like I say, to the Elite Eight, and they know what it's like to come deep into this tournament, this core group of guys, and they are outstanding players, outstanding athletes. Oregon, UNC, initial thoughts on how these two teams have played to get this far and what we may see in the game this Saturday.
Well, I mean, in some ways the Ducks match up really well with North Carolina, because when you picture what Oregon's going to do on the offensive end, they're going to spread the Tar Heels out, and they're going to force North Carolina's bigs to play, it is many of Oregon's interchangeable parts. It's a team without necessarily a true point guard per se. They use a ball movement and a player movement offense that is going to create looks for them against the Tar Heels bigs who dominate the low post. At the same time, there's a big matchup. I mean, North Carolina's a one-trick pony, and maybe they're not. With Barry playing as well as he had in the postseason, their point guard plays. Barry's a good player. He's been playing really well at the point here in the postseason. But when you look at why is North Carolina where they are, and they're obviously a very experienced team too, a team that's been in this spot, and a team who's kind of have that feel-good story of the Tar Heels, getting back their version of what happened last year, how we got screwed last year, has caught fire in the media a little bit more than Oregon's has so far. But it's a Tar Heels team that they do something extraordinarily well. They better than any team in the country, and better than any team in the country by a wide margin. They pound the offensive glass. When you talk about the percentage of available rebounds, the opposing teams haven't even gotten 60% against the Tar Heels on the defensive end. So with all of those second and third and fourth chances, they make more buckets. They have more possessions, their opponents, game after game. That is something that the Ducks are really going to have a problem with, obviously, considering, even with, the play of Jordan Bell in their last contest. What do you have, 13 rebounds and 8 blocks in that game. But even with that, this is where they miss Boucher. This is a matchup they could really use him. But, of course, the points would be different if he was in the lineup.
Yeah, and it's the first, when you go through their list of opponents to get here, Teddy, it's the first team with size that they'll face. Iona was a small ball club. Rhode Island's a group of very talented, a lot like Oregon, to tell you the truth, because they have a multitude of talented swingman types on that Rhode Island squad. Michigan, guard-oriented, not a heck of a lot of size. And then, of course, we just talked about Kansas only having Landon Lucas. So you've played 4 teams that without Boucher you match up real well with in this next matchup against the likes of, Kennedy Meeks and Isaiah Hicks and Justin Jackson, guys that, just like you say, go after the boards. It's going to be interesting to see how Dana Altman chooses to play this one. You would almost think his advantage here is he's probably got more athletes on the floor and the potential to speed the game up. And, you want to speed it up against North Carolina. You run into dilemmas each way in this contest, but it's almost the better option for Oregon rather than to come down and try and half-court it. And we saw, North Carolina is such a fascinating team, Teddy, because they don't play defense for 40 minutes. They just don't. Their mindset, their philosophy is, we want to go out and win 90-70 is how we want to win. But as we've seen twice in this tournament, if in fact, with 4 minutes to go, we're in a 5-point game, a tight contest, then we'll will ourselves to play the type of defense that we're capable of, but we just don't like to do for 40 minutes. And they shut Arkansas down, a very good offensive team for the last 4 minutes of that game, went on a 12-0 run, and did the same to Kentucky. Again, a very good offensive team, far above average. Both of those SEC schools can score points. Both held 5-point leads with 4 minutes left, wound up giving up 12-0 spurts and lose the game. So when they want to buckle down, they can. I don't know that Oregon wants to face them half court. I'd almost take my chances playing quicker if I were Dana Altman. But again, a high-tempo game, that's North Carolina's game. We'll see which way Altman chooses to go. He chose to slow Kansas down when he had the lead. But prior to that, that pace was pretty quick. Tell me, just from an up and down or an Oregon perspective, how would you play this one against North Carolina? I think North Carolina can play it either way. They could play half court and dump down to the bigs as much as they want. But Oregon's got a real decision here to make. Dana Altman's got to have a strategy.
And it's funny because in looking at North Carolina's losses this season, there's been two kinds. There are a handful of losses. The one group are games where they were racing up and down the court, like against Duke and Kentucky, and they just got outscored. They scored 83 in the one and 100 in the other. And then you had the games like Virginia, where the Cavs held them to 43 points, and Miami held them to 62, and Georgia Tech held them to 63. So it was the disparity between those two type of results for North Carolina tells me that Albany's got a choice. It's not like, all right, we're going to sit here and we have to slow it down or we have to speed it up. Oregon is, in my mind, is the team much more likely to set tempo in this game than North Carolina. North Carolina will push it if they can, but they're not always great at controlling that, obviously. And when you talk about, Altman versus Roy Williams is a real good recruiter. When it comes to X's and O's, I don't think it's even close. So there is respect for the Ducks built into this line, I think, as a result of that. The markets never seem to have North Carolina disregarded in that sense. But, pace-wise, from a pure matchup standpoint, even if Oregon does get into a half-court game with North Carolina, I think they have matchups they can exploit, and it's a similar story on the other end. Even if the pace is not frenetic, this has the potential to be one of those games where both teams shoot at a high percentage, and those type of games, you'd rather have an over in one of those type of games than in a game where everybody's missing shots.
Yeah, and that's probably where those who play totals based upon venue come in. But there is a case to be made, Teddy, that tempo and high tempo can oftentimes make up for poor shooting and still produce a lot of points. In this case, even in the form of foul shots, free throws, where you can see some Oregon players getting into a little bit of trouble trying to defend North Carolina's bigs. It'll be interesting. For the tournament so far, Oregon overall in 4 games, aggregate total, they've shot 50% from the floor, 115, 4, 230. Excellent shooting by the Ducks throughout this tournament so far, and better than that, 43.2% from three-point range. They've got multiple weapons out there outside the arc. Perhaps that's the way you go against this North Carolina team. Try and trade 3 for 2s. There was a weakness in UNC last year. It was shooting the three-point shot. That same weakness exists this year, I think. If you're going to, nitpick Carolina, the three-point shot would be their weakness. They've only gone for 32% thus far inside the tournament. Had a very poor game against Kentucky. Could bounce back here. You always expect good teams to bounce back, but the 3 of 15 performance against the Wildcats wasn't an especially good one for UNC. Once again, the line and total in that game as we speak right now, North Carolina -5, a total of, depending upon where you shop, 151.5 or 152. But that one has seen some movement, some traction toward the other. Teddy, we're not going to give any predictions or plays on these 2 games here today. Obviously, we'll save those for client sales. But any last thoughts on either of these games? Anything we didn't cover that you might have had that you wanted to speak about where these 4 teams are concerned?
Well, there was one point I wanted to make about the Oregon Ducks. Certainly, and what they've done to get here. It's Tyler Dorsey. You talk about the hot shooting. I mean, their worst shooting game of the tournament was 45% against Michigan. All right, the other 3 games they were right at 50% or better. And that was your coin flip game that they won. They won a couple of, what do we call them, white knucklers, coin flip games that came down to the wire, which I think probably serves them well in what's expected to be a relatively tight game here. But Tyler Dorsey's been he's the MOP of the tournament right now. He's been the most please tell me why they don't call that MVP. You make us remember MOP. But, I mean, Dorsey's been the best player in the tournament. And with Dorsey and Dylan Brooks playing at that level, Oregon's been unbeatable. Can those two guys, we talked about earlier, can Sindarius Thornwell do it again? Could Javon Blewett do it again? Can Dorsey have another game in which he carries the team and shoots out of his mind from three-point range? If he does, Ducks are live. If he doesn't, if North Carolina come up with a defensive game plan to finally shut him down, Tar Heels are going to roll in this game, I would think. It's certainly a game that they have that potential if Oregon shooters don't get off.
Yeah, and it's a good point to make, Teddy, because as we saw in the Kentucky game, Roy Williams unleashed Justin Jackson to chase Malik Monk all over the floor, and Monk had a poor shooting game. Jackson's a tough guy when he's defending you. He's a tough guy to get your shot off against. You have to figure that maybe they unleash him against Dylan Brooks here, which leaves Dorsey to be the guy. He and Dylan Ennis, the Villanova transfer, Bill Pritchard Benson. They've got a lot of guys, but like you say, Dorsey would have to lead the way if, in fact, Brooks is held down at all by Jackson. Dylan Brooks is an NBA talent, so I'm not so sure anybody can hold him down, but we'll see. That's why these coaches draw up game plans, and we try to bet them as we see them. Interesting game. I think both of these will be really good. That will do it for today's podcast, our examination of the NCAA Final Four, which takes place Saturday. I myself do have a 20-star blue chip up and available right now at sportsmemo.com involving one of these two games. You can get that right now, as I said, on the homepage of sportsmemo.com. Also, look for all Teddy's work at sportsmemo.com. His selections have been on fire where college basketball is concerned. Teddy, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the numbers were 38 and 17. Am I wrong there, or am I close?
Yeah, I won a couple more. I think it's 39 and 17 now. It's been pretty good.
17,
so, yeah. We won with Georgia Tech and NIT action early in the week.
You want to go ahead and get involved with Teddy's stuff right now, running red hot. And we do have, we're talking here on Wednesday, but there's 3 college games tonight. College hoop throughout the next couple of days here. If, in fact, the CBI gets to a third game, you want to pay attention to see if Teddy has to play. So check out all this stuff, sportsmemo.com. For Rob Veno, for Teddy Covers, thanks for listening to today's podcast. We'll catch you again next Wednesday, where we'll probably be discussing NBA once again. I don't think we'll get into Major League Baseball too quick, but we'll probably talk NBA next week. Thanks for listening. Take care.